Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Political Forum. This is your chance to speak with elected officials inside the city of Chicago. I'm Mike Jacobson. Joining us tonight, Alderman John Arena of the 45th Ward. Alderman.
Mike, good to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.
All right, folks, if you have a question, comment, or concern for the Alderman, the number's at the bottom of the screen, 312-738-1060. That's 312-738-1060. And please, we're also seen not only on KNTV, but also on our website at knTV.org/hotline. And we're also streaming live on Facebook as well at CanTV Chicago. And you can check us out there. So many different ways to check out these two, handsome gentlemen, I guess we call ourselves, right?
We're so modest.
we are. Okay, so let's get this started. So first and foremost, addressing the elephant in the room. So the February election came, and you did not win re-election.
No.
So 8 years in office. Talk about, first of all, your first 8 years in office. And what you can remember from it.
I remember a lot, and amazing experiences connecting with the range of communities that the 45th Ward encompasses, working hand in hand with folks on some really complex economic development issues, housing issues, issues of accountability within city government, within the city council, really kind of bathed in the politics of a city like ours, which has a rich history in politics. And trying to make sure that I'm kind of staying true to my North Star of being open with people and accountable and speaking truth to power. And that means both locally, talking to people in my community, saying, look, these are the things that are needed in our community. And sometimes those are difficult conversations. And also downtown, where we definitely needed more and hadn't seen that in the 22 years with the Daley administration. We're a council that kind of worked around the edges of progressive reform, but never really dove in and created it. So being a founding member of the Progressive Caucus, kind of handing that off now to a new group of aldermen that are coming in that are going to take that baton and really run with it. I think that's, for me, 8 years isn't an end. It's what you start and what the next generation has to continue with, and I'm really excited to see what happens there.
So this is unique because when you came aboard, 8 years ago, there was a new mayor also coming aboard. So, fresh alderman, fresh mayor. Now we're seeing that we have about a dozen new aldermen coming in with another fresh mayor. So talk about your experiences and how it can relate to these aldermen that were coming in.
We have to. I looked at that as a fresh start, as a new opportunity, right? Knew who Rahm Emanuel was, very strong political figure, a lot of history. Was actually the congressional representative for the area where I live. So, and most of the 45th Ward. So, I had some political familiarity with them. I had no personal relationship with them. And there was optimism that we were going to see kind of a shift and a new approach. And I think some things did change. From an infrastructure and transportation standpoint, the alternate forms of transportation, investing in public transportation more, in bike lanes, and talking about, he brought in Gabe Klein from DC, who really kind of set us on a new path in terms of, how we look at sharing the pavement. I think those are some things I was really excited about. But he's a very controlling, as much as he told me in our initial interview was, if you have a principled case to make it and vote your conscience, that really wasn't genuine. It's nice to say, but then when you do it, there are repercussions that he wanted to impose. So we never had a strong working relationship directly, and I accepted that because, their opposition's good, and I think it's healthy to have debate on things. I tried to work with him and offer support on things that I could agree with him on. Like I mentioned the transportation, some of the reform to the city's municipal code in terms of business licensing, things like that. But it's a matter of you try to find where you can align with somebody, wherever you are on the political spectrum. And that's a great opportunity for this new council to look at this new mayor who, for me, presents herself as much more open, much more easy to approach and engage in a conversation about things of substance, and is really kind of campaigned in a very steady and measured way. If you look at what she did coming in the race early and being consistent in her message throughout and saying, we need to talk about equity across the city. We need to talk about inclusion. We need to talk about being together as a city, not just put it on a poster, on a slogan, and then go back to business as usual. So I think there lies the best fertile ground for this new council.
Yeah, so let's go more to that. So what do you think you can expect from Mayor-elect Lightfoot? I think you're kind of talking about the differences that you see already between her and Ron. So what can you expect moving forward?
I think the housing crisis is going to be the thing this administration has to approach and look for real solutions that break the barriers that have concentrated, the issues of affordability, which has always been camped in this idea of, well, it has to be in places where just of poverty. And my battle with affordable housing, which really was centered to the opposition that I faced. We have 50% of the folks that are in the census tract where 5150 Northwest Highway, the building at question, is going to be built, would qualify for the building. And yet some of those people are the very ones that are opposed to it. We have to have a real conversation, and recent articles are showing that it's starting to click in people's mind that housing is becoming predatory, and it's sapping so much of our economic opportunity for our local businesses to survive. Because the reality is, if you're paying more than 50%, if you're paying more than 30% of your income in rent, the delta between 30 and 50 or 45 or wherever you are is lost economic activity in your community. That's money that would be spent at the local coffee shop that you want to see open and survive. That would be spent at the local fruit market. That would be spent at the local retail shop that you want to see fill an empty storefront. So there is a direct correlation between housing equity and economic empowerment in your communities. If we can get to that conversation and set aside the idea of who's rich, who's poor, and who should live here and who shouldn't, we can do an awful lot. And I see that as a critical opportunity for this administration.
Because it seems like elect Lightfoot, she was really concentrating on really the neighborhoods more than downtown. That's really what I think she said. We have to invest in the neighborhoods. And that's what you're talking about, housing, jobs, and also just helping to build some blighted communities, right?
Exactly. Because some communities, I'm very lucky. The 45th Ward, the Northwest Side in general, the North Side in general, its basic infrastructure is very sound. We have to make sure that that kind of infrastructure, that the streetlights are working, that the curbs aren't broken, that there's places for people to gather and do it safely, for businesses to open up in there. But that starts with government investing in that basic infrastructure. And when we do that, we're going to be able to see revenue increases, because as you increase opportunity in neighborhoods that are historically stagnant because of those issues, a 1% increase in property values across these neighborhoods would be a huge influx of sales and property taxes, which are two main revenue drivers in the city. This is where the opportunity for that investment to pay off very quickly. And then making sure that, and again, this is something I see in Lightfoot's transition team, looking at arts and culture, right? Nick Cave is the co-chair, who's a world-renowned artist, one of the co-chairs for her arts and culture. The list on that is very robust. And going into communities, and it's the thing that we did on the Northwest Side, I had so many conversations with folks who practice the arts, either as a profession or as a hobby, but saying that they couldn't actually practice their whatever art form, music, print, whatever it is, in the community where they live. They had to go somewhere else to display their work or perform their work. We changed that. We started opening up theaters, doing pop-up theaters, putting murals on empty storefronts, doing things to make art that there was a casual association with art in the community. And it immediately shifts the perception of the community. Somebody's investing time to do that. Somebody cares. Now we can have a conversation about what's next. I see that as the thing that connects the infrastructure, right, the cold government funding of streets and sidewalks, to the people walking on them and what they experience when they walk down those sidewalks. We can marry those two things. We have a huge opportunity to create community in neighborhoods where that's fractured.
So there's a lot to unpack here, because now talking about communities and talking about, let's focus more on the affordable housing and really in building communities, because people say, okay, if I'm an alderman of a ward, I'm like, hey, if I'm getting big businesses in, hey, that's got to be good for my ward. Money's coming in. But there's also people that say, but wait a minute, you're changing the landscape of the community, and now people who used to live in a community can't live there anymore. So talk about that delicate balance. We were just talking about this before the show.
Exactly. And this is what we see constantly. Logan Square is a great example on the north side. I know there's neighborhoods that are on the south side and west side that are experiencing the same kind of push and pull. We say, well, we want to bring businesses, we want to bring the recognized brands to our community, the things that we want to have at the end of the block that we now have to travel for. But as soon as we do that, as soon as we're successful in that effort, the rent at the apartment down the street goes up. Because that landlord says, well, now there's a coffee shop, a Starbucks, whatever brands you want are there. There's investment. They see money coming in. They see, well, somebody's willing to pay a little bit more to live next to that. Location, location, location. That's fine. That's capitalist system we're working in. Don't say we can't be within a capitalist system. That's never going to work. What we have to say is recognize the system and recognize the trigger point. The trigger point is if you don't talk about the housing availability first, as you're talking about bringing economic opportunity, then you're losing that. You've already lost the battle, and that's what we see over and over again. The businesses come, the rents go up. We lament the fact that the woman who lived there for 70 years has now pushed out of her bungalow because the taxes have gone up, or that apartment that they've lived in for 30 years, the family's getting pushed out. If we continue to lament it and then don't change the model, then that's insanity to me. So this is the opportunity to look at how does housing, across the spectrum of housing, types of housing, single-family home, mixed income, mixed, multifamily of different scale, number of bedrooms and types of units, all of these things, senior versus, general family housing. This is what has to be put into more upfront master planning doctrine that we can do very quickly by engaging communities. Communities want to talk about what they want in their neighborhood. We can define that, and now when the development comes, when the opportunities come, we have something to set it against that says, does your development proposal match what this community needs and wants? And now you have something to guard against the overdevelopment, the predatory development of opportunity in low-income neighborhoods who say, we'll take anything because we don't know we've never had a conversation about what we should put there. This is the planning, the approach we need to do up front, and that's the first 6 months, 100 days that we need to do very locally. And I think the other kind of general thing I'll say is, it's not about big and global. It's about small and local. We need to be at the micro level, the street level, the individual building level, and be saying, how do we activate that space? How do we activate that space? And we can do that. There's community groups, there's chambers of commerce, there's models that work very quickly to identify that. And if you have government working side by side with the private, community, I think there's lots of success there.
How important, though, like talking about housing and really not focusing on affordable housing, because I've spoken to a lot of people this election cycle, and it seems like there's this, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a prejudice for people wanting to have affordable housing in their neighborhood. They're for it. They're for affordable housing, but I don't want it near my house.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it comes down to, well, don't put it in this lot, which is, I could walk to, but put it over there by that. And then when I propose it over here, they want it somewhere else. I think we can't play that game. That's the code for just don't do it. Right. And anybody who comes with that model says, somebody else, it comes down to people say, well, what I heard about 5150 is, well, we don't need it in our community, so that means somebody else who's going to come up here and do it. People live in neighborhoods that they know, and what we know, and the data shows very strongly, is that people in our community across this city are struggling with housing equity and cost. And that's middle class, blue collar, traditional families and households are paying 40-50% of their income in rent or mortgage, and never thought of themselves as housing burdened, are starting to say, wow, this is getting hard to maintain. Our taxes are too hard to maintain. And the other irony that comes in this conversation with the single-family home owners is, I want my property values to go up, but I want my taxes to go down. And those two things are just linked, right? So what you want is steady incremental growth in your property value. If you're an investor, Well, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for anybody who says, I just want to come in and flip houses in your neighborhood. That's instability, and that doesn't do anything for my community. I want stability and steady growth that people can have their incomes grow along with it, have their families grow along with it. So this is where the conversation has to be. It can't be about it's not for us. It is for all of us. And as we look at ways to reduce the burden on low-income families who might take that extra $300 or $400 a month that was going to rent in a market rate apartment at $1,500, $1,700 a month, getting an apartment at, say, $900 a month, you take $300 or $400, put it in their hands, they're shopping at the local shops. They're spending that money. They're going to spend it on healthcare that they've been deferring. They're going to spend it on education costs for them or their kids. So if we want folks who we say, well, you're not working hard enough, no, we're just taking too much out of their hands and not letting them invest in themselves. Like we always say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Let's stop taking their bootstraps away.
Looks like we have a caller. Caller, do you have a question or comment?
Hello.
Yes, hello?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to ask the alderman, and I don't know if you all have already talked about this, but a lot of people have said, that he did not win re-election because he stood up for affordable housing and for low-income people and poor people in the ward, and that was ultimately why he was voted out. And I just wanted to know, if he had an opportunity, would he do it differently, or would he do everything exactly the same?
That's a great question. I think there's things that I would do in terms of personal reaction to certain things. A lot of this got very personal and heated, and so I need to be my best self as I'm representing my community. I'm a human being, and those are the things that I would say I needed to react better and make sure that I was being more even in some of my responses. But in terms of the policy, in terms of the success, in terms of taking on the issues that I took on, absolutely I would do it all over again, even knowing the results of this or outcome of this election. It was that important to me to see investment in my community and have that investment be equitable, and that we talk not the way we've been talking for years before, that I saw how politicians would just run away from any kind of controversial development, even if that development was good and healthy for our community. I didn't want to be that kind of representative, and I never got into to say, well, this needs to be my job for 20 years, and the only thing I do. I've had a very varied career. I've spent almost a decade serving my community and showing a lot of great success and improving quality of life in my community, and I'm incredibly proud of that, and again, would do it all over if I had a chance.
Thank you, caller, for that question. I appreciate that. Okay, so now let's move something which is on a lot of people's minds, and it was Lincoln Yards.
Yeah.
So, the council voted earlier this month, to provide Sterling Bay with a TIF package of up to $1.3 billion for the development. How do you feel about it?
Voted against it. I voted against the zoning change as well as the subsidy in the finance committee as well as in full city council. This is again what we've done over and over again in planned developments that we do in the city. We ask developers that we're giving you value. It's not kind of common knowledge to understand a piece of land has value based on what's on it or what it's under, what the ability to build in based on the legal structure. So zoning is a legal construct. It says that you could build a 1-story building, or you could build a 10-story building, or a 100-story building. Value goes up as the floors go up, right? So if we increase the zoning like we did from basically manufacturing, which is the lowest per square foot value, to DX7, which is downtown zoning, literally downtown Chicago, you have just created a windfall of profit because you can build up to that ceiling. We do this all the time, and then we tell the developers, you know what? When you build that little subdivision, you need to build roads, put street lights and curbs and gutters that meet all of our city standards, and then cede them back over to us. And we're not going to give you a dime to do that. There's 2 projects I could point to that we've done in my ward that are on a smaller scale, but the construct is the same. We increase the density, give them value, and we get something back for it. Definitely could have used the same model here. Say, look, we're not going to sequester all of these billions of dollars in value created just to focus on this. Let's give that money legs to be used where we need it, wherever in the city. But at the same time, seeing the investor who's getting profits from the increased zoning to reinvest in that property that serves their development. So that's why I think that the whole model was completely backwards.
And I think that I've heard, from people who are saying that money could go towards people in their ward. And you were talking about before about infrastructure, like around the city, that money could go towards instead of.
We have bridges. We just saw a bridge on Lakeshore Drive, snap. I mean, we have infrastructure that's critical, and if we're sequestering money on the north side in, a place that has a huge amount of intrinsic value because of location, being right on the river, being in Lincoln Park, you don't have to incentivize investment there, right? If we didn't do that project, somebody's going to come along and say, I'll do it because I know I'm going to have a renter. I know I'm going to have investors that want to come in with me. Where we don't have that opportunity is places where the fundamental infrastructure is broken. Well, that's where we need to invest. That's where we need to go forward first as government and plow the way for them. And then invite them in and say, use this infrastructure we built, but anything that's specific to your development, you pay for because we're giving you value to do it.
How can we, residents of the city, voters of the city, and also city council learn from something like this, from a deal like this? Because we don't, obviously, there are a lot of people who don't like it.
Yeah, there was an awful lot of opposition to it. The reasons and the construct that got us to that place is a lot of politics that dates back a decade. But we're here now. What we need to do is learn from it. This is a typical TIF deal, just on the most grand scale you can imagine. We've been doing this the wrong way for a long time. The opportunity going forward is to reverse the model, is to say, look, TIF isn't the appropriate tool for every problem, and we need to find ways to free that money up as we increase value, increase revenues, to go into communities so we can, again, advance that and increase value in those neighborhoods in a modest way, and not look for the big, the one big project that's going to create all this value. There's so much opportunity in a city like ours, culturally, economically, the diversity of the city. We can invest in communities and find revenues that way. It's going to take a shift in thinking that I think exists in this new council, from what the new members that I've talked to, some of the returning members, as well as this administration. So I'm really looking forward to a new day in that regard.
So we have about a little more than 2 minutes left. I got 2 more questions. See if we can fit both these in. Number one, the Progressive Caucus. You started the Progressive Caucus, brand new leadership coming in. Also, do you see changes in the Progressive Caucus, and what should the Progressive Caucus be focused on moving forward?
It's really looking for a way for them to be leaders. I mean, the caucus has the opportunity to grow from the 11 it is now to possibly 15 or 18 members. You have the only other caucus you have that are that large or close to it are the Latino caucus and the Black caucus. So the Progressive Caucus can be a force in these conversations. And what we were talking about towards the end of this term in the council was talking about how the council needs to have its own strength. It doesn't need to browbeat the mayor. It has to be an equal partnership. They have to start bringing ideas to the table. They have to be empowered to do these things. They have to know their own rules and run their own table. They need to assign their own committee chairs. They need to have thoughtful leadership, like from Scott Waggis back in the 32nd Ward, who's been a longtime member of the caucus and has been a leader in saying, let's look at our finances in a different way. And the young guys coming in, the young women coming in that lean towards a more, they get branded as democratic socialists, whether they are or aren't, isn't neither here nor there, because there's plenty of folks on the far right that are members of this council already and will return that scare me more than anybody with a DSA moniker. But they're thinking about the whole city. And when you represent your community on the city council, you have to be thinking about your community, but how it fits into the broader whole of the whole city. That is where the progressive movement can really be strong and partner with a mayor like Mayor-elect Lightfoot, who I think is thinking in the same direction.
Last question. So Mayor-elect Lightfoot promised to issue an executive order on May 20th, Inauguration Day, ending aldermanic privilege. just came out today that now she's had a
How
lot
much
of
time do we have?
conversations. I know. And that's why I want to get this in.
This is a whole show.
I know. It's like, is how, like, do you think that's going to fly?
The problem, I don't know how that works legally. There is no ordinance that says an alderman
Right.
gets 2X. It's a cultural norm amongst people who work with each other all the time. And the best way I can explain it is if this were a town of 2,000 people with 10 or 15 zoning changes and a 7-member council, every one of those members should know what's going on in every zoning change. We do thousands of zoning changes across the city with 2.6 million people and millions of square acres and millions of buildings. It's impossible for me to research every one of those, even if I just cherry-picked the biggest ones. So the question is, how much do I defer to a local alderman and his job of rounding up support, talking to people, educating people, and then bringing that to the council and basically telling us, here's what I know about this and here's why it's good for my community. When you get to the level of a Lincoln Yards or a 78, you're talking about a citywide effect. The local stuff, you need local representation. When it comes to protected class arguments like affordable housing with 5150 and other projects that kind of were tangential to that, where projects don't go forward because of a protected class argument, that's where she needs to say, look, here's how we're going to stop that from happening. We can't let prejudice run the table on zoning issues like that, like was done on 5150.
All right, so we got to wrap up. Before we wrap up, I got to give you the floor, to give it any thanks or what you want to do, for 8 years here, so you can look at the camera and tell people what you want to tell them.
Well, I mean, first, I want to thank the residents of the 45th Ward for supporting me through two election cycles in 2011 and 2015, and giving me the opportunity to bring businesses to the ward, to move the conversation on how we talk about development in our ward. To move the conversation about transparency in city government, to move the conversation about what is the role of an alderman in the broader scope of city council. That, to me, is the best prize that I've ever been given. And I thank, all the folks that I've worked with, both in the ward and outside the ward, to help advocate. There's just a long list of neighborhood housing advocates, like the folks who started Neighbors for Affordable Housing, Chicago Housing Initiative, Access Living. Those are folks that have really educated me about what people are really struggling with and then how to articulate that in a political way and in a convincing way to move things forward.
Well, we also want to thank you for your support of KNTV through years and your time here, so that's
Yes,
much
very proud of
appreciated,
that.
so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you also for your time tonight. All right, folks, that's been Political Forum with Alderman John Arena. Thank you for calling in. Thank you for tuning in. As always, Political Forum is every Wednesday at 7 p.m. And until next week, everyone please have a good night.